Okay, this is Chapter 2 of Advanced Tax, and we're talking about sources of tax law. And so there's basically three sources of the tax law, and that's the statutory sources, which means the Constitution. And then the Internal Revenue Code is part of that. It's codified into the Constitution. And then the administrative sources, which is talking about the IRS's participation, the regulations that come from the Treasury Department, all those administrative type things. And then there's judicial sources, which is talking about the courts. So we'll just delve in just a little bit. This is a short chapter pretty much. Well, I mean, this chapter's not so short, but the coverage of it this is a bit abbreviated just because I'm trying to give you an overview. So for statutory, we got the Constitution, as I mentioned, and then we have Internal Revenue Code, which started out, the first time it was codified in 1939. 54 had a new codification because it was a big change, and also then in 1986, which was the most recent time it was codified again, it was renamed because it was such a big change. And those revisions that happened in 2017 did not get a renaming. They're still called the IRC of 1986. But there's on page 25 of our textbook, the Nellen book, there is a demonstration of the citing when you're trying to cite a reference from the Constitution or sorry, from the Internal Revenue Code, which is just a component part of the Constitution. And then administrative sources, the regulations is the most prevalent one that we use in tax. The Treasury Department issues those regulations to explain what Congress really meant to say whenever they passed a law. And so they kind of interpret and flesh out the congressional law about tax, because of course all tax law comes through Congress. Originally, I mean, that's how a new law is passed. And then the IRS and the Treasury Department interpret those to show us how to actually use them. Sometimes they get it wrong, but most of the time they get it right. But for regulations, there's demonstration about how to cite the regulations in any kind of paper or to reference it when you're talking to a client. And it's on page 26 of the Nellen textbook. Then there's revenue rulings. Aside from regulations, you got revenue rulings that are IRS proclamations. They don't have the effect of law, but they definitely are guidance that you should abide by, because you might not pass if you are in an audit situation. If you don't follow those rulings, then you will have to prove to IRS why you are right. And then if they decide according to their rulings, which they most likely will, you'll have to go to court in order to override their opinion. But in any case, then you got revenue procedures, which is the internal IRS rules. They don't have force of law, but they are just their way of approaching, like, for instance, how do we treat independent contractors versus employees, that sort of thing. That's one of the examples that could be a procedure. This is how we analyze it to see how they're relating to this worker, but just an example. And then there's notices, which is Treasury decisions and actions on those decisions. Then there's general counsel memorandums. Those are internal documents about the positions they've taken, but not specific, just general internal documents. Then there's letter rulings. These are about specific individuals' proposed transactions, and they're published to give guidance to other people. And then there's determination letters that are about specific individuals also, but these are about things that have already happened and they're not published. So this means IRS is saying that was wrong what you did, or that is okay what you did, but it's not something that's available for everyone to learn from or whatever, because it's not published. Then there's technical advice memorandums. They're completed transactions too, and they're positions that the IRS has taken, and they're published, but not specific to an individual. And then those are all administrative. So it's all about the IRS and the Treasury Department. Then there's judicial sources of law. And of course, judicial is talking about the court systems. So there's, as we already discovered in the first tax class, there's the U.S. tax court. That's just one court with 19 judges, no juries. Then there's the small case division where you don't have appeal rights, but it's much smoother not as official, not as much need for the lawyer to represent. So that one, a lot of CPAs would rather go to small case division with their client than to take them to actual tax court. But it still is the tax court. It's just this small division, small case division, and you can't appeal or protest if you get a decision you don't like. Then there's U.S. District Court. There's many courts, and there's a jury available there. Then there's U.S. Court of Federal Claims. There's one court, 16 judges, no juries. And then when you cite judicial cases, you have to use a certain format, and they have those demonstrated on page 216. If a U.S. tax case, a tax court case, is lost by the IRS, they will either put an A or an NA on that case. And they demonstrate this on page 215. What they're saying is we agree with this or we do not agree with this. So if you say A, if it says A, it doesn't mean agree, but I mean, it means agree, but the letter A stands for the term acquiesce. And so that means they are agreeing with the court. So if the court votes or the court rules against the IRS. If the IRS puts an A, that means you can hang your hat on this concept and you can go ahead and follow the court's decision without worrying about it, because IRS has determined they are not going to challenge you if you do it the way the court said was okay. That's what acquiesce or A means. Then if you get a NA, which means they don't agree or they disagree, but the NA stands for non-acquiesce. That means that the court said this thing that happened should be ruled for the taxpayer, but the IRS still disagrees. So when they put that NA, that means you're going to have to fight them again if you take it to court, the same issue that the case was about. So anyway, that's something good to know if you ever look at the cases and you're trying to find a case that it was determined in the court in the favor of the client that you're trying to do something with. Then if it's an acquiesce, that means that case you can hold, it can hold water. And in other words, you're not going to get challenged if you use it. But the NA means you still probably have to fight the IRS if you take that same position. All right, so then the circuit court and the federal district courts on a map on page 212 of the textbook. In Louisiana, we are in the Western District and Circuit 5. So we'll have an example where we're going to work with some of those in the problem demonstration. But you need to know how to do that. We did some of these in the intro class or the first accounting class. But you need to know how to determine what district each state is in. Okay, then there's a tax research process they talk about in this chapter. We're not going to do a lot of tax research, but we are going to do some. And so along with chapter 4's coverage, we're going to actually do some research. We're just learning a little bit about it now. But the first one is we're going to identify a problem. That's the process. Identify the problem, refine it to get clearer. This is what the real trouble is. And then we're going to locate sources. We're going to use tax research tools like commercial services and the internet. And those are both together considered CATR, which is computer assisted tax research. So commercial services would be either online or physical hard copies of these services that you pay for, like CCH and RIA, Westlaw, LexisNexis. There's a lot of them. And so those for a fee will provide these commercial research tools. And then also you could go with some just usually free services like irs.gov, the other government sites, even Congress has sites about tax law. Libraries sometimes have these. Accounting firms sometimes provide these tools, but usually they're for no fee. But so anyway, any of these tax research tools could help you determine what law is applied to the issue that you have with your client. And so those exploring all those options would be wise. And then you assess the sources, as in the priority they have of being official or not. And then you determine a solution based on what you've learned, and then communicate the results to the client and into your internal records to basically defend the position you have put on the return, and that, or defend the position that you advise the client. So that if you're challenged, you'll have a way to explain to IRS why that you did what you did, or to the courts. Okay, then there's CPA exam coverage for tax. They use research tools on the CPA exam currently. On page 227, they talk about this. Now, just a caveat, the CPA exam is in flux as of January 1, or somewhere there, about January 10th of 2024. There's a new CPA exam structure in place, and it means a lot of the old CPA exam plans are still there, but there are some changes. And so tax still is covered in the main CPA exam, but it also has an advanced tax, not as in our class, but a more complex tax structure as one of the specialty areas you could choose to take your exam. And so you'll need to research more about that before you decide which section you want to, which discipline you want to focus on. And so the best thing to do, though, is still, at this point, still prepare the way that tax was structured to be covered in the past, because they haven't actually had time to give the exam and grade the exam. None have been graded at this point of the new one, and won't be for a while, months. And so right now, the best thing to do is concentrate on what was already required to be on the CPA exam for tax, because most of it will still be required for every CPA, but then some of it could get shifted to the discipline of tax. But in any case, right now, what's being tested using research tools is the procedures, ethics, and accounting issues, then the property transactions, individual taxation, and entities taxation. So there's links here I have in the notes, and you can pull up my notes and look at those, or you can just type these in, but they lead you to some tools that you could use to learn about how the research will be structured on the exam, like from the AICPA. And then also the evolution of CPA.org is a really good source to help you to see what's changing and keep you updated as we learn more about the exam. And so that's really all I'm covering in this one. We're going to be learning some methods of research, and some of the things that are shown in this chapter will be the basis for the research and citations that we'll be doing. Okay.